Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori, and today I'm going to give you guys my October 2022 wrap-up. So I managed to read 7 books in the month of October, which is actually a pretty decent reading month for me, and I know that it's going to be good because November is going to slow down quite a lot since I will also be doing National Novel Writing Month and attempting to get a giant chunk taken out of my first draft of my own manuscript. First up in the month of October was Priest of Bones by Peter McLean. This is a grimdark kind of like post-war gangster vibe book. Patrick Leo recommended this book very highly on his channel, which is why I decided to give it a try. And what he really liked about it that I found to also be the case is that this book contains an incredibly strong character voice. Basically, Thomas and his family ran the town as one of the gang bosses, and he is coming back with this ragtag bunch of war survivors that were in his company with him, and he is going to retake the town that has slowly kind of crumbled away from the glory days when he and his family used to run it before. I totally agree with Patrick that the voice of Thomas Piety was incredibly strong throughout this book. He is telling us the story in first-person narrative, and I think that for this type of a character, it actually worked really, really well. I do think that the strong points of this book are the character voice and also the just general relationships between Thomas Piety and his crew. I think they're really authentic and they felt very realistic and immersive throughout the entire book. I also enjoyed the world building of this novel. Everything has that very grungy, gritty, grimdark feel without being gratuitous, which is something that I really shy away from in grimdark. There wasn't any part of this book that felt over the top, exaggerated in a way that was just done for shock value, which is something that I definitely appreciated. And I would say that Peter McLean does a phenomenal job weaving in trauma and PTSD, both from childhood experiences and combat. Kudos to him for that. And I will add to that content warnings for anyone who might have a harder time with really heavy mental health themes. This book has a lot of that. Overall, I did have a good time with this read, and I am definitely still percolating on exactly how I feel about it. Next up, I read Thrice by Andrew D. Meredith, who is a close author friend of mine, and this was my first time ever reading anything by Andrew. This book features a relationship between a man named Joven and his adopted son, Leaf, who is a chosen one vibe turned on its head. Leaf is a beautiful little character, and I honestly cannot wait to read more of these books. This book has all of the wholesome adventure vibes in fantasy that you could possibly want. Andrew used inspiration from Slavic folklore, which is very evident in the creatures and world building of Thrice. It is also told through an episodic kind of format, which means that it's a very accessible, very quick read. This is just a really wholesome adventure story, and I think that's the best way that I know how to describe it. And I think that the highlight of this book really comes through in the relationship between Joven and Leaf. You can really see Andrew's experience as a father himself coming through in the main relationship of this story, and I think that it is incredibly authentic and beautiful to read. Next up, I read A Touch of Light by Thiago Abdallah. This is the first book in a series called The Ashes of Averin. A Touch of Light by Thiago Abdallah is honestly a really strong debut fantasy novel, and I don't know if I can highlight that strongly enough. This book, I think if this is where Thiago is starting, I cannot wait to see what he's capable of next. This book features a religion in which death is considered almost taboo. You cannot talk about people who have died. There's this obsession within the religion of staying immortal, essentially, and that's how you prove your worthiness to the deity that they worship. This book features 3 POVs, and all of them are incredibly distinct. We have one who is a young prince named Adrian, and he's trying to prove himself to his father after the death of his brother. We have Nasha, who is an outsider in a tribe of outsiders, and she is just also kind of trying to prove that she is one with the people. Then we have Lynn, who is a warrior who is kind of in exile, but she is part of the church and religion that is basically controlling most of the continent. This book was really interesting to me because usually I kind of resonate with one particular character very quickly in a book. And it took me a little bit of time to really settle into these POVs because they're so nuanced and I was discovering new things about them all the time. And by the time I was done, my favorite character ended up being the character that I didn't know that I was going to relate to at all. He gave us some very fresh twists on some fantasy elements that we are all familiar with. So yeah, I will definitely be reading book 2 as soon as I can get my hands on it. Next up, I went for a historical fiction read and I chose Jingus, Birth of an Empire by Con Iggulden. This is the first book in the Conquerors/Emperors series. I can't remember which one it is, and I couldn't remember in my November TBR either. I had been wanting to read something on this era of history for quite a while, and I had been told that Con Iggulden was an incredible writer, and man, nobody's kidding. This book starts when Temujin, who will become Jingus later on in his life, starts out as a young boy, and we get to meet his family, and we get to see all of the horrific trials that he and his brothers and his mother went through after the death of his father. All of those struggles really forged him into the incredible, ruthless leader that he would become later on in his life. The way that Con Iggulden tells his story, I could not put this book down. I felt like I was right there next to these characters. It is incredibly immersive, earthy, authentic storytelling, which fits with the era and the characters so very well. The one thing I will say about this book that was a little jolting every once in a while is that Iggulden does tend to use omniscient third person. So every once in a while we were head hopping in the middle of a section, and that did get jarring a few times, but overall that's really my only critique of this book. Last but not least, I was asked to read these 3 historical murder mysteries from author Patricia Meredith, who is the wife of Andrew Meredith, who wrote Thrice. And she had asked me to read these 3 books. In them is a character who has what was then known as dual personality disorder. And so she had asked me to do kind of a sensitivity-esque read of these books to just kind of see how the character was portrayed and how I felt about the story as a whole. To be totally honest, I have not read historical murder mysteries ever. These are my first ones. I thoroughly enjoyed this. I've been meaning to read Agatha Christie for ages and just haven't gotten to it. But I really enjoyed these books. I really did. From the historical murder mystery side of things, I thought that they were very pleasant, easy reads. I enjoyed them. They did not take pleasure in holding things back from me, but instead it felt more like I was being kind of encouraged into the mystery more than anything else, and that's something that I really appreciated. It did not feel like I was being held back from being in the middle of things and being able to figure things out myself. This takes place in 1901 Spokane, Washington, and there is a lot of historical information included in these books, which I think is awesome. Patricia really did her research as far as the historical era and what was known about mental health at the time and all of those things. When it comes to the character who has dual personality in these books, I definitely think that Patricia is doing a good job balancing wanting to show what was known at the time with also what actually exists in the disorder itself. Because if you don't know, dual personality, which is as it was beginning to be known in the early 1900s, developed into then multiple personality disorder and then dissociative identity disorder, which is what it is called today. So I realized that not everyone knows what dissociative identity disorder is, so I wanted to drop a definition for you guys here in the video. You can pause and read it if you'd like. This one is from the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. I was formally diagnosed diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder in 2019, and that is the main reason why I am so passionate about reviewing media representation of characters who have that disorder. As mentioned here in the Harvard Medical quote, it is a disorder that is highly stigmatized even now, and that is one of the reasons why I think it's really important to include factual information in the media representation that we are given. If you have any questions about what I've shared in these 2 slides, please feel free to leave me a respectful comment down below, and I would be happy to answer that for you. I will give a content warning on this just a little bit because the character in question is viewed as a villain by a large majority of society. I think that the way that Patricia is doing it is walking a very fine line that she's going to end up on the right side of. She's really exploring a lot of powerful mental health themes in these books, and I think that as you read through the series, you really start uncovering more and more of the layers, and just as the characters do, you start to understand things a little bit more. I think as we go on through the series, Patricia has the opportunity to do some incredible work with a character who has a very stigmatized disorder even now, and showing how it was stigmatized, why that was wrong, and how someone with that disorder would have survived and coped in a time when mental health was really over-medicated and misunderstood. I think that Patricia is an incredibly gifted writer. She has a very, very good voice. I look forward to reading more of them and seeing how Patricia decides to work out the story of these characters. I realize that I was talking mostly about the mental health side of those books, but there are so many elements in them that I think a lot of readers will enjoy. The romance, I think, is very well done. I think that the family themes of these books are really strong, and the friendship themes, and overall Patricia just does a really great job with characters. That is my stack from the month of October, and I may be doing some dedicated review videos for some of these books, so keep an eye out for those. I would love to know what your favorite book that you read in October was, so put that down in the comments below. I hope you guys are all having a fabulous week with fabulous 5-star reads, and I will see you in the next video.